Hi there, this is Danny Beaumont, and welcome to this week's XD Tips and Tricks. In this session, from week to week, I try to take a deep dive into some of the new capabilities that we have with Adobe XD, in particular workflows. I wanted to focus this week on a session basically geared towards the work from designers to developers that take their work into production. I'm going to pause for a second. All right. Looks like we're live, which is excellent. So again, just to focus on how you can prototype your content, how you can view it yourself, how you can share it with your users, and then really diving into how you hand that off to a developer in a designer-developer workflow. So with that said, let's switch over to Adobe XD. And I have a couple different prototypes going on here as examples of my work. The first prototype is one that let's assume I'm sharing with another designer on my team, my buddy Ike. So I have basically just some phone layouts here. We delivered a feature for Auto Animate that, actually, I'm lying. We had delivered a feature for time transitions last month, and that time transition allows you to automatically transition between artboards. In fact, I'm going to turn off my video here so you can focus on the screen. So time transitions allow you to transition from one artboard to another. And let's say I was working on that design myself. I have it here in Adobe XD, and probably the first thing I would do would be to preview it on my own machine using the desktop preview app. So I'm going to switch to prototype mode and click on that first artboard. I need to set the home or the starting point for the artboard by clicking on this icon here towards the left. And from there, I can come up to the desktop preview button here, or just hit Command or Control Return on my desktop. And that will bring up this player. So as I'm working myself, if I want to test out this time transition feature that I'm looking to apply, this allows you to onboard into the app. So it gives the viewer a sense of what my application is about through this time transitions that you're seeing here. So if things are looking pretty good to me, I can finish viewing it here on the desktop. And let's say I want to do some usability studies. I want to test it with actual customers. For that, I can come in, and just to the left of the desktop preview is the device preview option. And this is one that does require that you have a hardwire USB connection to the device that you have your XD prototype in. And the idea there is that you can hand this to someone. They can interact with a mobile device, an Android phone, iPhone, an iPad, things of that sort. Interestingly enough, once you have the content loaded by way of that USB cord, you can disconnect the cord and hand it to that person to do usability studies. But it does need to be connected to pick up any changes that happen in the design. One thing you may not know is as you're working, you can interact in essence with artboards and control what is shown in this viewer. You can even switch over to design mode and start to change the content that you're working on live, and that will show up in either the desktop player or the mobile player if it is USB connected to the computer that you're working on. All right, so assuming for a moment I've gone through all of those phases, and I'm now ready to actually create a prototype that I can show to my colleague, Ike. For that, I'm going to make sure again that I've got that prototype mode on here, and I've selected the first artboard in the sequence. If I hit Command or Control All, I can see the wires that have been defined for a flow. Now, interestingly enough, when you do go to build out a prototype, if you have no wires anywhere in your design, uploading to design specs, for example, will upload all of the artboards in your project. If you have two artboards wired together and you use design specs again, you upload to design specs. If you have just two wires out of many artboards connected, it's going to automatically upload only the two wires that are connected. When it comes to a pure prototype, so not design spec, but a prototype that steps you through the experience, it is going to literally look at that home artboard and anything that is wired to that artboard as part of its flow. So I have lots of different artboards on this project, but only what I'm looking at here. Actually, if we highlight again, yeah, only what I'm looking at right here is going to be uploaded because I can see the wires are basically constrained to the artboards that I can see here. All right, so with that home screen set, I'm going to come over to the rightmost option and I'm going to select Publish a Prototype. Now, as you look to share, depending on what your environments are like, you're going to want to choose different options here. There's definitely merit to experimenting with this a little bit to get a sense of how you like to handle versioning of your prototypes, how you want to be secure about the content that you're creating. So in its most basic sense, you can come in and publish up a prototype. You'll give it a name. Notice that I did a couple of slides here for our tips and tricks session. I didn't constrain it or control it in any way. So I'm not using a password for the design. Actually, I'm lying. I've invited someone here, my buddy Ike, so I can go in and remove that, basically, and then come in and just create a public link for my design. So if I have no concern about security, I'll just go ahead and publish that public link, and I don't need to put a password. Anyone that I share the URL with will be able to access the design. If I want to step it up one level around control, I can decide that I do want to require a password. So if I say go, and I can have visibility here now too as well. This is something we added more recently. So if I said go XD 2018, I could create a password for this URL. I can freely distribute that password along with the URL, and anyone that has the combination would be able to access the prototype. Taking it a step even higher than that, let's say I'm working on a really secure project, and I'm worried that if I share a password and a URL with my colleague, that he or she might share it too far, and it might leak outside of our control. If I want to raise the bar one level higher around security, what I can do is instead of creating a public link, I can go in and choose a private link. So let's see what I've done here for a moment and see if I can undo that a little bit. Okay, so I'm toggling, you'll notice here, between one form of rights to another. So when I click on a private invitation or a private link, it takes me to the world where I have a great deal of control. So the rules are, yes, I'm going to create a prototype. It's going to have a URL. I can share that URL, but I can only share it really with people that I invite by way of email. Those folks will receive an email invitation. In order to click on the link and access the prototype, they have to do it from their mail client, and that mail client has to be of the same name. When they click on the prototype, it will then ask the system, the web will basically ask them to log in with their Adobe ID. So with all of those constraints, it has to be their email address, the link that they click, they have to log in with that same Adobe ID that might be referenced when I invited them, and that will constrain who can and can't see the prototype. So I'm going to check as we go here a little bit on comments. The goal to a tips and tricks session is that I learn a little bit in addition to you learning a little bit. These sessions are actually saved on YouTube, and I'll show you towards the end of the session how you can get a hold of them. But if you have questions as I'm talking, please throw it into the comments area here on Facebook. It's kind of a funny venue for a webinar, so to speak, but I really do enjoy the questions that come up for you and what you're thinking as I'm talking about all of this here. All right, so let's dive a little deeper now into this named invitation workflow. So we'll go back out. I want to do kind of my onboarding prototype here. So I'll make sure that's selected. I am going to come in. I want to publish a prototype. I want to go ahead and use this private link technology, basically, and we'll call this real onboarding, and we'll give it version 01. Notice I can control other attributes, full screen, hotspot hints, things of that sort. I've done this before, obviously, because I tested it this morning, so I can update that link if I'd like to. Notice that I also have, it's grayed out here right now, one person that I can invite. I'm going to go ahead and publish that up. I probably didn't have to. I probably could have switched over to that update tab. But it presents me there after that anyhow. So I was here, I went in and gave it a name, I hit update. When I switch over to the invite tab, this is where I control which email addresses can log in with their Adobe ID. So I've got my buddy Ike Watson. He has been invited. I could come in and add our manager here. So good old Katie of Clever Concepts as well. So when I invite her, I can use her email. I can tell her what's going on here. So, hey, Katie, quick look at the onboarding tutorial. I could save that message and make sure she's invited. From here, having published that, I can go out to the web and take a look at what Katie and Ike are going to see. So it takes me into this real onboarding version 1, as we named it. Notice I've got this beautiful button here as well. Even if let's say I'm pushing up this prototype and I'm dashing to a conference room and I've invited Katie and I've invited Ike and I forgot to invite someone else, I can go to any web browser and log in with my Adobe ID and get to anything that I've published, and by the web interface right here, come in and add additional people if I'd like to the prototype that I've already built out. Real onboarding, this is the one we just did. So what happens from here is that as the viewer of my design here wants to step through and get a sense of the experience, you can't tell, but I'm not clicking on anything right now. These time transitions are basically transitioning through the onboarding screen. If Ike wanted to stop and give me comments, he can always come to the navigation here towards the bottom, even if it's a time transition, and get to a particular navigation and add a comment. So he may come in here and say, basically, sure, background looks awfully dark. And when he submits those comments, we'll see, I'm logged in as myself here just to confuse us all. If I were logged in as Ike, I would be able to send the comment back to Danny. There's something known as @mention, which allows me to actually call out anyone that's been invited to the prototype, and they'll get a specific email with the reference that's been made in this comment and a link taking them to this exact artboard where the comment was made. So as a team, we start to be able to communicate to one another really well and share comments and bring it to each other's attention that those comments have happened. So that's prototyping. I don't want to kind of bait you here with talking about the designer to developer workflow. So let's kind of jump over to that section now and spend a little more in-depth time. So we assume for a moment I've gone in, the work is all good, it's signed off, and I'm ready to now take this into my production environment with my developers. I'll swing back into XD, and I do have this work set. As we know, it's all wired together, everything's pretty good. One of the things I now have the ability to do as a designer is control which assets associated with a project actually get exported as part of the design spec process. So I've lost track because I don't think any of us can keep up, but it may have been one release ago or two. We offered the ability, we're on XD Lucky 13, and we're heading to Adobe Max in about 2 weeks with a phenomenal release, by the way. But XD 11 or XD 12 enabled the ability for you to, now I'm going to forget what I was talking about. For you, give me a minute. She's having a brain fade. For you to have the ability to actually flag which assets are exported as part of design specs. So before that time, without that feature, you honestly had to kind of probably give XD and the source file to your developer if they wanted to control how the assets were exported. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to switch over to design mode, and I'm focused on these particular artboards. So if I click in on any one of the artboards, I can see I've got layers here, I've got some layer names, and I have content or assets that are placed in the design. What I can do is come in and consciously decide which assets are going to be exported. So notice that I have a little icon that's dimmed out here that says mark for batch export. I can come in and decide I do want to export these assets. I can do it in bulk. I believe I can do it at an artboard level if I want everything to carry over. I can then proceed to the next artboard and set some of those. Let's give this a go, in fact. If I come into the entire artboard, notice that I can go in and just select the artboard, and then here at an artboard level, include that entire content for a batch export. All right, I'm going to take a quick look at a question that came in. So the question is, hey there, I have a question. If I create a square and I drag and drop an image from my desktop onto the square, they'll be combined. Is there a way to do the same with an image which is already on my artboard? What I do, and there may be a better way, I'm not sure that there is, but let's see how quickly I can fake this out. So I'm going to come on in and grab the cover screen, maybe. Oh, goodness. I just want to grab a graphic that's safe here real quickly. So I'm stealing something from the Facebook page. Let's try this guy. And I'm just going to drag it over. That is probably not working. Hold on. I know, I asked for the questions. So I've got an image over here, and I'm just going to drag it into XD. So this is the question. I can drag it onto the design canvas. It doesn't have to be part of an artboard. And if I were working, I'll try that one more time. Let's say I have a new artboard here. I'll duplicate this guy and get rid of much of what's already here. And let's say I draw a container where I want an image to occur. The user's saying, hey, I already know this, Danny, but I can come on in and grab an image. If I can do that twice. And if I drag it right into the container, it fills nicely, which is great. But what if the image is already on the canvas? The answer for that, in my experience, is come on in. If you've got it here and you want to fill a container, come on in and just cut it or copy it to the clipboard. And then come to the object. And when you right click, if you say paste appearance, it will in essence emulate that same behavior. So it's pasting the image that's already on your design canvas into that shape. From there, you're free to come in and crop and scale the content and then click back off. Okay, kudos to the first person with the first question today. Let's see how well my brain is doing with remembering what I was doing before that. So we were actually looking at individual artboards and the ability to export the assets associated with the entire artboard. I'll get rid of this just to not confuse myself. But as I mentioned, I can do it at an artboard level. So this entire artboard can be exported with that checkbox. Or as I've shown you, I can click into the artboard and just decide individual assets that should be exported. So the assumption is, as the designer, I've thought about what I have and which assets I want exported. From here, I then go on in to share my design. And this time I'm going to select Publishing Design Specs. So I've got the Real Redemption Variations. I've published it before. Notice that I can choose the destination. As a designer working with a developer, I'll probably know, is this being developed for the web, iOS, or Android? And the way I answer that question will determine some of the file formats that are available to the developer as they extract the content. In theory, I can do it 3 times with all 3 exports being different and having a full set of assets that are optimized for those 3 different targets. I can include the assets. So this is, I'm going to zoom in on this guy a little bit. Notice that we now have this ability to say, yes, go ahead and include the assets when you export it. And as usual, I can require a password. So when I go ahead and update now, that published instance, so as I mentioned, did this a little earlier this morning. It's now updating and most likely adding those 5 assets that I've just tagged for export into my design spec. All right, with that said, I'm going to jump out to the browser and bring this window over here. And let's take a look at what we got going on. So I'm here in a design spec. I can see that here. There are a total of 7 screens. If I click into, just to acclimate you to design spec. So let's slow down for a moment. In this instance, I'm now a developer. As a developer, I've been given this as a goal, and I now want to go produce it in my development environment. Some of the things I'm going to be interested in is if I look on the design, I can see that there are wire frames connecting these guys together. Notice as I roll over, I get a sense of what the wire flow is. So which artboards lead to which direction. I can see that here just by rolling over. From there, I can click into any one of the experiences. So when I click in there, I get a different set of information. If, as a developer, I roll over these guys, let's just see. Yeah. So if I roll over, I can see some containers. I see the raw elements. If I actually click on those items, notice what I'm getting. I get accurate measurements that are giving me distinct attributes about how this text container, for example, is placed on the artboard, how this guy is placed. So I see I see its dimensions, so 277 by 277, and I have some lines that allow me to understand what it's aligned with, so text and other objects. Notice that I think there's a way to be a bit fancy about this. Yeah, I'm falling short on bit fancy, but I am able to come in and check each of these spatial details out right here on the design canvas. In addition to that, I get other information. So let's kind of jump to one of the previous artboards for a second. One of the juicier ones where we actually flagged it for export as the designer just a little while ago. So on this artboard, if you'll notice here on the right-hand side, as design specs has evolved, we've started to give you more and more developer information. So screen details, I see the viewport size versus the design size. So if this were a scrolling artboard, I would have a sense of where the viewport ends and where the additional content is. If that content were there, I would see it because I'm a developer now. I'm not really experiencing the prototype as much as developing this out to spec. As I look further, here's the individual assets. I can come in, there's a kind of a tricky web selection mode here. I can click on an asset, right? Because this is the web. I can't shift return or shift select the content because I'm in a web browser, but I can click on and off these assets to select them in bulk if I'd like. And from here, I can determine how they get exported. So down here towards the bottom, I've got 3 that are selected. 2 of them are vector. 1 is a bitmap. I can then, in bulk, come in and say, go ahead and download those, but I can control different details. Do I want the vector content to export out as PNG, PDF, or SVG? For the bitmap, the image part, do I want that to be a PNG or a PDF, which is kind of interesting. And then there's additional details here. Typographically, what typeface is being used, so character styles. Any interactions are also included here. So let's go a little further and just looked at that timed sequence there. We've got more fonts, the time delay. I can see this trigger time, pretty sweet, right? So I can see what it is the designer spec'd out. They want a transition based on time, so an auto transition, or based on tap, where you actually click to advance to the next mode. So I've got a skip tutorial here. The time transition plays, but what if the user wants to get out and does not want to get the overview tutorial? They can go in and tap on that button, and that is recorded as part of this spec. So consistent with the behavior of prototypes in the browser, design specs also have a commenting workflow. So let's see how I can get to that actually. Yes. So what you'll notice is this is also depth that we've added in the past few months. Here on the right-hand side, if I click to the kind of commenting icon, it allows me to now come in and comment. So let's see. In this instance, I didn't invite individual people. Had I done so, the whole @ mention would work. I could go in and say, hey, Danny, I think you made a mistake here, or I have a clarifying question. But any communication from my developer can blow through to me as a designer here. I'm going to look at questions now. Let's see. All right, looks like we're in pretty good shape. Sebastian's still the winner with the most questions, 1 out of 1. So that's your homework assignment in the future, is to come up with good questions to ask me. That's all I ask of you on your end. Taking things a little bit further, this is an example of a designer-developer workflow where the developer is going to go develop in their own environment. They're going to extract the content, save it out to a directory, and put it into their own production work. I do want to mention real quickly, if I still have this open, let's just see real quick. Not positive. Oh yeah, here you go. Elevate your experiences. So also over the past few months, we've continued to extend the functionality of XD by way of APIs. And that comes in 2 different flavors. One is the ability to connect other applications to our application. So tools like Simply, ProtoPie, Avocode. These are workflows that are development environments that allow you to have things like versioning, commenting, teams or groups that can work together on the same assets. So working with these partners, they extract the content that I pretty much showed you, but they bring it into that developer workflow directly. So definitely good partners that we're working with if these are development environments that you're interested in. In addition to that, we have integrations with things like Dropbox. I think as memory serves, we just announced integration with Slack. So being able to, another one is Jira, for example. So if I am in a development environment, if we use Jira from Atlassian as our development environment, using that extension, that connectivity between XD and those workflows is really useful. The other, as you probably know, I'm going to go ahead and switch to my face here again because we're almost done. The other one, as you probably know, is that we have set up a fund, and we've talked about the fact that we're developing plugins for XD. So the ability to plug in functionality within the application, that can be developer functionality, or it can be just designer features that automation examples, things of that sort, that make your workflow within XD much more robust. So I'm going to stop because we're shooting to keep these things at about a half hour, and I hit that pretty well. Let's go back to tips and tricks for a second here. Next, what just happened there? Silly beans. I may have overwritten myself. Let's see real quick. It's okay. I can improvise. We're going to go right here to my beautiful artboard. Let's close this guy out. And I'm just going to bring this up because I've got many ways to share. This week, as I mentioned, is Designer Developer. Next Wednesday, I've got another slot, and we're going to talk about responsive resize in action. It's a new capability. I want to make sure you understand how it functions. There's some nuances there, so we'll spend a bit of time on that. The week after that, I and most of the XD team will be in Los Angeles at the Adobe Max conference. It's going to be a very big event for XD. I think that if you can't attend it in person, you'll want to grab a box of popcorn and watch the keynote and look at some of the new capabilities that will be coming into the XD application. Thank you for your time. I hope to see you here next week. The last thing I do want to mention real quick, let's see if I can do this, is that I do have a YouTube channel. If you search for Ping Danny or Adobe XD, you'll probably come up with it. This is where the recordings from tips and tricks and some of the what's new videos that I've recorded in the last few months live. So I encourage you to come on in there and check it out. Thank you for your time. Hope to see you next week.